Welcome back, it's me, Lou. I'm here for another action figure unboxing and review, and today we are shining the spotlight on this. We have the Masters of the Universe Revelation He-Man, and this is part of Mattel's Masterverse line. He features 30 points of articulation, and it's He-Man as he's seen in the new Netflix animated series. Alright, so I've said this in a couple of videos before. When the Revelation figures first came out a few months ago, I didn't really jump on board like full steam. Initially, I just picked up Eva Lynn. I enjoyed her character a lot in the Revelation series, or at least at the time. I finished, the first half of the series, part one. Right now, I'm about maybe 3 or 4 episodes into part 2. And I'm starting to pick up more of these figures. It got to the point where I probably had like 3/4 of the collection. I'm like, I'm just gonna go ahead and just grab whatever I see. I'm not that I'm entirely in, but it's like I say on other videos. The collection's very doable right now. Really about like maybe 3 waves in, and 2 of the waves are readily available to stores. And with it being the holiday season, I'm seeing a couple of sales. So whenever I get the chance, if I can find a bargain, I'll pick up some of the figures. And this happened to be one of them. This was He-Man. I got him at Target maybe like a week or 2 ago. And Target was doing a sale specifically just on the He-Man figure. And I think I might have paid $15 or $16 on this guy. He-Man and Skeletor, for me, when the Revelation line first came out in Wave 1... they were very plain and vanilla. They didn't seem anything extraordinary to me, so that's why I was kind of lukewarm to this series to begin with. But seeing as how I've kind of amassed this tiny collection of Revelation figures, I kind of feel it's necessary to have at least one He-Man and one Skeletor. So we're going to take a look at this. On the side of the box, we have a really nice illustration of He-Man. On the back, I've said this before, I love what Mattel's doing with the Revelation line. You know, on the back of the box, they give you this giant illustration that probably fills up about 75% of the back of the box. And they give you a nice, meaty description about the character, which I think is great. Nowadays, it's very rare for toy manufacturers that make action figures. You know, they don't really give us any details about the universe or even the specific character that you're buying. You know, back in the 80s, you know, you could buy like a G.I. Joe figure, and then you get the cool bio card that would, like, you know, discuss the character's like real name, you know, maybe with their education, his skill set, this and that. And I really like that for the Revelation line, Mattel's giving us this cool description of the character, you know, kind of fleshes out the universe, a little bit of world building. So even if you're not a fan of the cartoon, or if you're new to Masters of the Universe, it gives you like, it's like a primer, you know, it kind of introduces you to this world. And I think that's great. For this, it says He-Man, the most powerful man in the universe. Defender of Castle Grayskull, protector of the planet Eternia, and guardian of the entire universe. There is nobody stronger, faster, or braver than mighty He-Man. He is quite simply the most powerful man in the universe, past, present, or future. A vessel for the mysterious power of Grayskull, He-Man inspires the heroes of Eternia to fight the forces of evil. Without He-Man, Eternia and the universe would be doomed. So, this pretty much sums He-Man up. He's the protagonist of the Masters of the Universe world. He's been around since the early 80s. He's seen different incarnations, and this is the most recent one. Masters of the Universe Revelation, which is said to be a direct sequel of the original Filmation cartoon from the 80s. But as some hardcore fans will tell you, they don't like this cartoon. I'm enjoying Revelation. I have a couple of, minor nitpicks here and there, but for the most part, I do find it entertaining. So, I mean, I found it entertaining enough that at least I'm buying some of these figures. And we're going to take a look at He-Man right now. All right, one thing I've noticed with He-Man, much like some of, all right, so some of the packages that I've opened so far, He-Man and Moss Man, they feature this second cover over the plastic tray. And I'm not sure if that's just limited to the first wave of figures. Because I know some of the other waves, like I believe Man-at-Arms, which is wave 2, he didn't have this overlay, and instead I think he had all the plastic ties that held the figure into place. But I do dig this a lot. This to me feels really collector friendly, especially if you're a collector that wants to keep it still in the box. You know, you can easily pull this out, remove the figure without any interruption. You know, there's no ties to cut out. And then all the weapons and extra accessories could easily fit in. So I do dig this extra tray. I'm not sure if it was limited to only the first wave, though. Alright, so we also have this cardboard insert. Like I said before, if you need like some dressing for your shelf or your display, or you know, a mini diorama, you can always hold on to this and just use this as a backdrop. In terms of accessories, we have extra hands. These look like gripping hands. So it's kind of odd because the stock figure, when he comes out of the tray, it's a splayed out hand for, I'm assuming, for the shield, and then a fist. Now, for me, logic would dictate that, you know, instead of having a fist, I'd give the figure one of the gripping hands just so I can hold the sword. And I'm going to do that now. So I'm going to pull out his right hand and swap out this fist. Let's return this back to the tray. And then he'll have this hand so he can hold the sword. So it just plugs in. There's a little peg socket. It's not too difficult. Great reinterpretation of the sword. I think this is a really clean version of the power sword. It kind of retains the iconic shape, especially towards the bottom of the hilt here. I really like that. And it's kind of refreshing to see the sword as a whole piece. You know, back in the 80s, you always get the two halves. You had the Skeletor half and then the He-Man half, and then you'd press them together to like make the complete sword. For me, it's kind of refreshing just to have, you know, one single sword. It's not cut in half or anything odd like that. Here's his shield. I dig the fact that, you know, the back of the shield's actually like detailed with something, so you kind of have like the reinforcement plates here, and then you have the straps. So I dig that a lot. And it still retains the classic color scheme of the original shield. Alright, so first impressions of He-Man. Right off the bat, it's, you know, this is He-Man. It's a slightly modern interpretation of him. It's, like I said, this figure felt very vanilla for me. It didn't feel like it had as many bells and whistles. But then again, it's He-Man. You know, by design, this is what he looks like. It's not like he's covered in a lot of body armor. He's essentially a naked barbarian with a fur diaper. He has this belt. The furry topped boots with the straps. This is kind of new. He kind of has this bracer here, but it's new in the sense that the original OG figure had one sculpted onto his arm, but this one is actually a separate piece. And for me, this is kind of throwing me off because I'm not used to seeing it this large. He still kind of retains the classic harness on his chest, and it kind of pulls a page from the original design with the red squares on the top harnesses. It's not like, I believe the Filmation one, the animated design of the character, it's missing these red squares. And the original symbol isn't that HM deal. I believe it almost resembles an Iron Cross, I think, for the original figure. The harnesses, you can unclasp them here, like that. But we'll look at that later. But for now, my first impressions, it's a decent figure. Um, for me, I kind of wish he was a little bit bulkier towards the top. He's kind of too not necessarily, not that he's thin or narrow, but for me, if he's to be, if this is He-Man, if this is the strongest man in the universe, I kind of like the much more heroic proportions of the original '80s figures, where it was almost like you were looking at a triangle. Like the top of him, he's so top heavy that he had really wide shoulders, and he'd come in like this. Whereas this figure is just pretty much straight up and down. He's still very muscular, don't get me wrong. He's really buff and all that, but there's something about the older figures in their design where it was just so exaggerated, and it felt like it was a guy who could like carry the weight of the universe on his shoulders. Whereas this guy, he looks like he could be like a WWE wrestler. You know, he's bulked up, you know, but I don't know, he's not as super jacked as I'd like him to be. But that's not to take away from the sculpting. You know, the sculpting on here looks superb. Especially in the hair. So there's some nice details sculpted in the hair. One thing that does bother me about this figure is that in terms of the face, he looks a little younger than I'd like. I think they could have, you know, aged the look of his face maybe by, you know, 3 or 5 years. Give him a little bit harder lines, maybe deeper wrinkles around his mouth and under his eyes. Especially if this is considered to be a direct sequel to the original Filmation cartoon. Because for example, Teela in the new cartoon, she feels a little bit older than she did in the '80s cartoon. Definitely Man-at-Arms feels a lot older. And for me, this face on He-Man, I think his hair is great, but the face, it still looks a little bit too youthful for me. You know, I'd appreciate more if he looked a little bit older. I mean, when I look at this looks like a dude in probably like his, I don't know, 24 to 26 years old. And I'd like to see him just a little bit older, you know, maybe pushing closer to 30 or even like early 30s. Sculpting is really well done on his fur diaper here. I don't think there's any highlighting on it. It's just, I believe it's a strictly plain brown. It could have benefited from some dry brushing or even ink wash just to bring out the details. Likewise with the belt here, it's a very plain looking yellow plastic. There's some figures, like I believe Spikor, his belt is kind of painted with almost like a metallic finish, which looks really nice. And with this figure, the bracer here, I'm not sure if it'll catch it on the camera, but this is a much more glossier yellow, where this is very flat and matte. Same with the gauntlet over here. It'd be nice if they were consistent in their colors, and you know, if this one carried the same color tone as this, or if this resembled that. It's kind of disjointed, that this one's a lot brighter, a lot glossier, and then these two pieces here are kind of matted. Now let's try removing the harness real quick. I'll take a look at that. So it unclasps pretty easily. You can remove it. And this is a great base just for a plain barbarian figure. In my head, I'd love to get another one of these and just paint his hair black and just make Conan. Yeah, it looks cool. I mean, in some ways too, if you wanted to, hypothetically speaking, you could buy another one of these figures, take off the harness, and just throw it into your Marvel Legends and just say it's Kazar of the Savage Land. You know, I think this would easily pass for Kazar. And if you're unfamiliar with Kazar, just Google him. He's kind of Marvel's, you know, equivalent of like Tarzan, but he lives in the Savage Land with like dinosaurs and stuff. And I think he's married to Shauna, the She-Devil. Is that right? It's either Shauna or Sheena. I always get the two characters' names mixed up. So yeah, here's He-Man. Articulation-wise, his head rotates. It's on a ball joint, I believe. In terms of looking down, you look down, count his toes. Looking up is a kind of different story. There's not a whole lot of give looking up. He just simply rotates his head. His arms rotate. They can go out. If you notice, there's a bicep cut here, so there's a bicep swivel, like so. Double jointed elbows, and the pins are hidden. He has wrist articulation. They can rotate, and it can bend inward and slightly outward. Now, he has a cut underneath his chest, and it allows for some tilting movement. He could crunch forward about that much, arch back, not a whole lot. He's cut at the waist, so he could rotate at the waist. In terms of his legs, he could kick forward, but this is kind of a harder, stiff plastic, so there's not a whole lot of give. So even though the articulation is there, the range of motion is kind of hindered. He could kick outward. That's as far as he'll split out. Try to get this back. Shoot. There we go. Alright, so now for some reason I can't get his leg to like... Oh, there you go. Alright, he has a thigh cut right there, so there's some swivel. Or there's actually a lot of swivel. You go full 360 if you wanted to. Double jointed knees, again, much like the elbows, the pins are hidden. So it's not necessarily a seamless look, but it's a very clean look. He's cut at the boots, so he has a boot swivel. Ankle articulation is very standard. This additional bracer here could be removed, I believe, if you take the fist, remove the fist, this comes off. So you kind of have a very asymmetrical look. You have one side. I don't think this comes off. This, let me take a look. It might actually. So it looks like this gauntlet here is a separate piece. I want to say it comes off. It is a separate piece, but I don't know if it's glued on or not. Let's wait. Let me see if yeah, it's coming off. Alright, it looks like it's glued on. So if you can see here, it's glued on. And it's kind of ripping a little, so I'm just going to place it back. That's unfortunate. Oh, yeah, there we go. It's taken off. So you could remove it, but word of a caution, it is glued on. Which is kind of stupid because it'd be nice if you could take it off and just kind of have like a full seamless look going on. Yeah, so that's kind of neat. But if you do take it off, just like I said, be cautious. It's glued on, and I'm not sure how easy it is to scrape this glue or plastic off once you take it off. But yeah, I'm kind of stoked that you could remove it. I just wish they wouldn't have glued it on. I'm guessing it could have been maybe a safety precaution. You don't want a child swallowing this or whatever. But at the same time, the fist is pretty small also. And let's get this back in place as it was. I believe it was like there. And let's get the other bracer back on. Let's get the harnesses back on him too. Slide over his head. And then you just clasp it back right here. Yeah, so overall, I don't want to say I'm impressed. He kind of meets my expectations. He doesn't necessarily exceed them. It's just a very He-Man-like figure. I mean, he does what he's supposed to do. Let's try to get this on. Alright, so one issue with this here is that you're not going to be... I'm guessing, because the loop here is kind of tight. I don't think you're going to be able to get the shield on here unless you remove the little forearm guard first. So I think you need to remove this if you want the shield on. And then I think you're going to slide that. Yeah, like that. Yeah, so it seems like the only way you can get the shield on is if you remove the bracer. And then his sword simply goes in. One thing you'll notice that's different about this sword as opposed to some of the more traditional power swords is that some of the older power swords, especially the OG one, has that little kind of like, it kind of has like that hand guard in the front of the hilt right here, but this one doesn't have that. And there you go. It's a very decent He-Man. All right, if I had to rate this figure numerically on a scale of 1 to 10, it does what it's supposed to do. It looks like He-Man, and I don't want to rate him too high because it's like I said, this figure is a very vanilla figure. It's not like he has a lot of cool play features, and in terms of accessories, it's very bare minimum, but this is what He-Man has. So for me, I'm just gonna go with an even 8. It's not a high 8. It's not a low 8. It's just an even 8. Part of me would almost even say a 7.5. But it's a decent figure. You know, it's He-Man. It's what you expect. And you know, for me, it's just kind of like I wish his face looked a little bit older. This looks too young for my tastes. It sounds weird saying that, but you know, I kind of just wish it was an older, you know, looking version of the character. But all the details are there. I kind of would appreciate it if they gave him an axe, just because the old school one had an axe. But this is nice. I think it's decent. And I do like the addition of this forearm guard for the other side. So yeah, it's an alright figure. Now, on the subject of He-Man, let's bring out a close cousin of his. Here we have the 2000 and X He-Man. This came out, I believe, in was it 2001? It looks, yeah, I think this figure came out in 2001, if I'm reading the date correctly on his foot. So this was designed and sculpted by the studio, the Four Horsemen, and this was kind of when Mattel rebooted He-Man for the early 2000s. The line, I think, existed for maybe like at least two or 3 years. I think the last assortment was like the Rise of the Snake Men or whatever it was called. And those figures were like on the green cards. And I remember that's when I kind of bowed out of it because that line of figures was really hard to find. And with this 2000X line, they really made the most of the He-Man and the Skeletor molds. It seemed like there was always a new variation or repaint of He-Man and Skeletor, so this got kind of tiring because there's the cast of characters in the Masters of the Universe is so deep, but this got tiring and after a while because you just kept on getting He-Man and Skeletor over and over again, but just different versions of them. You know, you might get like a samurai version of like He-Man and Skeletor. You might get one in like different kind of battle armor. It was just bizarre. But I love the 2000X line. I think for me aesthetically, they were kind of taking a risk, you know, redesigning the characters like they did. But for me, as someone that grew up in the 80s with the original He-Man figures, I thought this was like a breath of fresh air. It seemed like it was Mattel really trying to catch up with the times and giving us a look that it felt relevant and it felt very stylized just because of the trademark style that the Four Horsemen were using in their sculpting. Like, this guy felt very proportioned. He felt very heroic. I mean, this guy's like super ripped. And I don't know. There's just something about these figures that really spoke to me, and I think it's amazing. The sculpting is really well done. The details, the accessories were awesome. This has a spring-loaded waist, so he has a play feature. The only thing that kind of held this figure back was the articulation. Much like many of these figures, it kind of felt like you were getting a small statue, and it was a statue with very limited articulation. It's, you know, the elbows don't bend, the knees don't bend. It's almost like a very static pose for the character. You know, even though his legs are articulated, he can't stand and hold a pose. So that was kind of bothersome. You know, they did have wrist articulation and their arms can go out like this, but, you know, for the most part, the articulation on these figures were just really poor. But the character designs, I think, were amazing. So yeah, big fan of the 2000X line. I'm really hoping with the Masterverse line of toys that they give us a reinterpretation of this style of character, but with the modern engineering. So this guy, you know, but with all the bells and whistles and articulation of the modern figure. That's what I'm really hoping for. And just because I had him on hand, here's the current Origins Masters of the Universe He-Man. You know, this is very much inspired by the OG one, although his head is a lot different. Although you do have the option of giving him the more classic looking head if you have the deluxe battle armor He-Man. And I believe some of the single carded He-Mans are now packaged with the old school OG head. Great figure. I think it looks great. So yeah, I mean, we have different generations of He-Man here. We have one that's a reinterpretation of the classic one. We have the much more modern Revelation, and somewhere in between is the 2000X. So yeah, I mean, He-Man's a dope guy. Like him a lot. Great figures all around. So let's wrap this video up. Once again, my name is Lou. If you are new to my channel, welcome. If you are a returning subscriber or viewer, thank you so much for your likes, comments, and support. I greatly appreciate it. So until the next video, take care of yourself, be safe, buy lots of toys, and most importantly, be happy. And I'll talk to you later.